The lighthouse keeper's last light, the old lighthouse stood sentinel against the crashing waves of the Atlantic, its weathered stone walls bearing witness to decades of storms and solitude. Thomas Hartwell had been its keeper for 37 years, and tonight would be his last. The automation equipment had finally arrived, gleaming and modern, ready to replace the human touch that had guided ships safely to harbor for generations. As he climbed the spiral staircase one final time, his arthritic hands gripping the worn iron railing, Thomas felt the weight of history pressing down upon him like the fog that often shrouded these rocky shores. The lamp room at the top was his sanctuary, a circular chamber of brass and glass, where he had spent countless nights tending the great Fresnel lens that had become his life's work. The massive light rotated slowly, casting its beam across the dark waters in a rhythm as steady as his own heartbeat. Through the salt-stained windows, he could see the village below, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight, and beyond that, the vast expanse of ocean that had claimed so many lives over the years. Thomas had always taken pride in knowing that his vigilance had prevented countless tragedies, that families had remained whole because of his dedication to keeping the light burning bright. He remembered his first night on duty, a young man of 25 who had sought the isolation of the lighthouse to escape the heartbreak of losing his beloved Margaret to consumption. The lighthouse had been his refuge then, a place where he could lose himself in the routine of maintenance and the simple but vital task of keeping ships safe. Over the years, the loneliness had become his companion, and he had found peace in the rhythmic turning of the lens, the sound of waves against the rocks, and the knowledge that his work mattered. The lighthouse had shaped him as much as he had cared for it, and now they were both being deemed obsolete by the march of progress. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas began his final round of checks. The fuel tanks were full, the lens was clean, and the rotation mechanism was running smoothly. Everything was as it should be, just as it had been every night for nearly 4 decades. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he found himself pausing. At each familiar task, memorizing the feel of the brass controls under his fingers, the particular creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, the way the light danced across the curved walls of the lamp room. These were the details that no automated system could replicate, the human touches that had made this lighthouse more than just a navigational aid. The radio crackled to life, and Captain Morrison's voice filled the small space. "Hartwell, this is the Margaret Rose requesting permission to dock. We've got a medical emergency on board." Thomas grabbed the microphone, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Margaret Rose, this is Beacon Point Light. You're cleared for the harbor. I'll guide you in personally." He adjusted the beam to illuminate the treacherous rocks that guarded the harbor entrance, his experienced eye calculating the exact angle needed to show the safest passage. The ship appeared in the distance, a dark silhouette against the lighter sky, and Thomas felt the familiar surge of purpose that had sustained him through all these years. As he guided the vessel safely to port, Thomas reflected on the thousands of ships he had helped navigate these waters. Each one had carried precious cargo, not just goods and materials, but human lives with their own stories, dreams, and destinations. He had been their guardian angel, their beacon of hope in the darkness. And tomorrow, a machine would take his place. The irony was not lost on him that his final act as keeper would be to save a ship named after his long-lost love, as if the universe was offering him one last moment of poetry before the curtain fell on his career. The Margaret Rose disappeared into the harbor, safe and sound, and Thomas returned to his vigil. The night was clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. He had always felt closest to Margaret on nights like this, when the beauty of the world seemed to transcend the boundaries between life and death. She had loved the stars, had often spoken of sailing among them when her illness finally claimed her. In his more fanciful moments, Thomas imagined that she watched over him from somewhere beyond the reach of earthly concerns, proud of the man he had become and the lives he had saved. The hours passed slowly, each one bringing him closer to the end of his watch. At midnight, he would extinguish the light for the last time, and in the morning, the technicians would arrive to install the automated system that would replace him. The thought filled him with a mixture of sadness and relief. He was 73 years old, and his body was beginning to fail him in ways that made the physical demands of lighthouse keeping increasingly difficult. Perhaps it was time to step aside and let technology take over, to find a small cottage in the village where he could spend his remaining years in quiet contemplation. But as the clock approached midnight, Thomas found himself reluctant to let go. This lighthouse had been his life's work, his purpose, his identity. Who would he be without it? The question haunted him as he made his way around the lamp room one final time, checking each piece of equipment with a thoroughness that had become second nature. The lens continued its steady rotation, the light sweeping across the water in the same pattern it had followed for decades. Tomorrow, a computer would control that light, calculating its timing and intensity with mathematical precision, but it would never understand the soul of the lighthouse the way Thomas did. As the final minutes ticked away, Thomas heard footsteps on the stairs below. To his surprise, several villagers began to emerge into the lamp room, led by Captain Morrison, whom he had guided safely to port earlier that evening. "We couldn't let you face this alone, Thomas," the captain said, his weathered face creased with emotion. "This lighthouse has been a part of all our lives. You've been our protector, our guardian, and we wanted to be here for your last watch." The small group gathered around the great lens, their faces illuminated by its warm glow, and Thomas felt a profound sense of connection to the community he had served for so long. Martha Collins, the village baker, stepped forward with a small, wrapped package. "I brought you something," she said softly, "a photograph of the lighthouse from the day you started. I thought you might like to have it." Thomas unwrapped the gift with trembling hands, revealing a black and white photograph of himself as a young man standing proudly beside the lighthouse that would become his life's work. The years had changed him, had weathered his face like the stone walls of the lighthouse itself, but his eyes still held the same determination and sense of purpose that had driven him through nearly 4 decades of service. The clock struck midnight, and Thomas reached for the control that would extinguish the light. But before he could act, young Timothy Walsh, the harbor master's son, spoke up. "Mr. Hartwell, would you teach us how to turn off the light, so we can learn from you one last time?" Thomas smiled through his tears and nodded, guiding the boys. Small hand to the control. "You press here gently," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And remember, every time you see this light, think of all the lives it has saved, all the families it has kept together." Together, they turned off the great lamp, and for the first time in decades, the lighthouse fell silent and dark. As the group made their way down the spiral staircase, Thomas lingered for a moment in the darkened lamp room. The stars were visible through the windows now, no longer competing with the artificial light that had been his constant companion. He thought of Margaret, of the ships he had guided to safety, of the storms he had weathered, and of the peaceful nights when the sea was calm and the world seemed at rest. All of it had led to this moment, this ending that was also a beginning. Tomorrow the lighthouse would serve a new master, but tonight it belonged to memory. Outside, the villagers had gathered around the base of the lighthouse, their faces illuminated by lanterns and flashlights. They began to sing an old sea shanty, their voices carried on the ocean breeze like a prayer for safe passage. Thomas joined them, his weathered voice adding to the chorus, and for a moment the years fell away, And he was once again the young man who had first climbed these stairs with hope in his heart and purpose in his soul. The lighthouse stood behind them, silent now but still majestic, a monument to human dedication and the enduring power of keeping faith in the darkness. As Thomas walked toward his uncertain future, he carried with him the light that had burned within him for 37 years, knowing that some illumination can never be automated, some guidance can never be replaced, and some love can never be extinguished.